Standing at the altar in my tailored charcoal suit, I watched 300 guests turn their heads toward the chapel doors. The wedding march had started 5 minutes ago, but there was no bride. My best man Marcus shifted nervously beside me, adjusting his tie for the third time. The pastor gave me a reassuring nod, but his smile was starting to look strained. That's when I saw Lisa's maid of honor Ashley rushing down the side aisle, her face pale as she whispered something urgent to the pastor. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My heart dropped into my stomach when I saw the expression on his face change. He leaned toward me and said quietly, "David, we need to step aside for a moment." The murmur of confused voices began rippling through the congregation like wildfire. As I followed him behind the altar, I caught sight of Carmen, Lisa's younger sister, sitting in the front row. Her dark eyes met mine with a look I'd never seen before, not pity, but something deeper. Something that should have told me everything I needed to know about what was coming. 2 hours earlier, I had been the happiest man alive. The morning sun streamed through the windows of my Pearl District apartment as I adjusted my tie one final time. After 18 months of planning, today was supposed to be the day Lisa Rodriguez became Mrs. Thompson. We'd met 3 years ago, at a client dinner where she worked as an event coordinator for the hotel, hosting our architectural firm's annual gala. Lisa had this magnetic energy that drew everyone to her. She could command a room with her laugh, and had this way of making even the most mundane conversation feel electric. I still remembered our first real conversation that night. She'd approached me during the cocktail hour, commenting on the building's Art Deco features that our firm had recently restored. Most people saw old buildings as obstacles to tear down, but Lisa understood their stories. She ran her fingers along the restored marble columns and said, "You didn't just renovate this place, you brought it back to life." That's when I knew she was different. Our relationship moved fast. Within 6 months, she'd practically moved into my apartment. Lisa had this way of filling every corner of my life with her presence. She'd rearrange my furniture to create better energy flow, replace my practical dishes with colorful ceramic sets she'd find at local markets, and somehow convince me to try restaurants I'd never have considered. She was chaos and beauty wrapped together, and I loved every minute of it. When I proposed last Christmas at Powell's Books, she'd mentioned once that bookstores felt like home to her. She cried for 20 minutes before saying yes. We spent the entire night planning our future: kids, travel, the house we'd designed together once I made partner at the firm. Lisa wanted everything to be perfect, especially the wedding. She'd spent months coordinating with vendors, tasting cakes, and debating flower arrangements. The Riverside Gardens venue had been booked for over a year, and she'd personally overseen every detail from the hand-calligraphed invitations to the locally sourced menu. Carmen had been there through all of it, quietly helping in the background. While Lisa managed the big picture with her characteristic intensity, Carmen handled the smaller details that Lisa would forget in her excitement. She'd remind Lisa about vendor payments, pick up decorations when Lisa was too busy, and somehow always knew exactly what her sister needed before she asked. I appreciated Carmen's steadiness, though we rarely spoke directly. She was studying art therapy at Portland State and worked part-time at Canvas and Clay Gallery downtown, where Lisa was all vibrant energy and bold gestures. Carmen moved through the world with quiet grace. The morning of our wedding, I'd arrived at Riverside Gardens early to check on the setup. The venue looked like something from a fairy tale. White roses and eucalyptus garlands draped the wooden arbor overlooking the Columbia River. Round tables dotted the lawn, each centerpiece featuring succulents and candles in vintage mason jars that Lisa had collected from antique shops across the city. The string quartet was warming up near the gazebo, and the caterers were arranging the reception space under the large tent. Marcus found me standing by the river, watching a family of ducks swim past. "Big day, brother," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. We'd been friends since college, and he'd been the one to suggest I move to Portland when Stevens and Associates offered me the junior architect position. "You ready for this?" I nodded, feeling that familiar mix of excitement and nerves. "More than ready. Lisa's going to look incredible walking down that aisle." We talked about the bachelor party from 2 weeks ago. laughed about my fumbled speech at the rehearsal dinner, and discussed the honeymoon Lisa had planned for us in Tuscany. Everything felt exactly as it should. That's why what happened next hit me like a physical blow. I was in the groom's preparation room adjusting my boutonniere when Ashley burst through the door without knocking. Her usually perfect makeup was smudged, and she was breathing hard like she'd been running. "David, I need to tell you something before this goes any further." "What's wrong? Is Lisa okay?" My first thought was an accident. Maybe she'd fallen in her dress, or there was some emergency with the vendors. Ashley looked around the room nervously, then closed the door behind her. "She's fine physically, but David, Lisa isn't coming. She called off the wedding." The words hit me like ice water. "What do you mean she called off the wedding? We talked this morning. She was excited, maybe a little nervous, but Tyler's back." Ashley's voice was barely above a whisper, but those two words explained everything and nothing all at once. Tyler Brooks, Lisa's college boyfriend who'd left Portland 2 years ago to find himself backpacking through Southeast Asia. She'd mentioned him maybe 3 times in our entire relationship, always in passing, always with a dismissive wave of her hand. Ancient history, she'd called him. We were kids who thought we knew what love was. "I don't understand," I said, though part of me was beginning to understand all too well. "Tyler, the guy who abandoned her to go travel? What does he have to do with anything?" Ashley's eyes filled with tears. "He showed up at the bridal suite an hour ago. Just walked right in like he belonged there. Lisa saw him and—" She paused, struggling with the words. "David, I've never seen her react to anyone the way she reacted to him. It was like the past 3 years with you just vanished." My legs felt weak, so I sat down hard in the nearby chair. "Where is she now?" "They left together. She didn't even change out of her wedding dress. She just grabbed her purse and walked out with him. She asked me to tell you that she's sorry, but she can't go through with marrying you when she's not sure about her feelings anymore." The room started spinning. 300 guests were waiting outside. The photographer was probably wondering where we were for the pre-ceremony shots. The caterers had spent all morning preparing dinner for our reception, and my bride had run off with another man still wearing the dress we'd chosen together. "Did she say anything else?" I asked, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. Ashley hesitated. She said Tyler was her first real love, and when she saw him again, she realized she'd just been settling with you, that you were safe and stable, but Tyler made her feel alive in a way she'd forgotten was possible. Settling. Safe and stable. The words cut deeper than any insult could have. For 3 years, I'd thought I was building a life with someone who loved me for who I was. Apparently, I'd been nothing more than a comfortable backup plan while she waited for her real love to return. I stood up slowly, straightening my jacket. "I need to tell the guests. David, maybe we should just make an announcement that there's been a family emergency or—" "No." My voice came out stronger than I felt. "These people took time out of their lives to celebrate with us. They deserve to know the truth, not some fabricated story to protect Lisa's reputation." Marcus appeared in the doorway, his face grim. I heard voices and thought, "Is everything okay in here?" Ashley quickly filled him in while I stared out the window at the river. A part of me wanted to be angry, to rage about the humiliation, and the waste and the sheer cruelty of her timing. But mostly, I felt hollow, empty, like I'd been living in a story that I'd misunderstood from the very beginning. "What do you want to do?" Marcus asked gently. I turned back to face them both. "I'm going to go out there and tell everyone what happened. Then I'm going to thank them for coming and suggest they enjoy the reception anyway. The food's already paid for. The band's here, and a lot of people traveled from out of town." "Are you sure about that?" Ashley looked horrified. "People will talk. It'll be so embarrassing for Lisa when she realizes what she's done." That's when something shifted inside me. The fog of shock began to clear, replaced by a cold, clean anger. Embarrassing for Lisa? She made her choice, Ashley. She chose to humiliate me in front of everyone we know, rather than have an honest conversation about her feelings before today. She chose to leave me standing at the altar like some character in a bad romantic comedy. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, Subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us now. Back to the story. I'm not going to protect her from the consequences of her own decisions. Marcus nodded approvingly. That's the spirit. You don't owe her anything right now. I walked toward the door, then paused. Ashley, is Carmen still here? Yes. She's with her parents. She looked pretty upset when Lisa left. I think she's embarrassed by her sister's behavior. I nodded and headed for the chapel. The walk down that aisle was the longest of my life. 300 faces turned toward me with expressions ranging from confusion to concern to dawning horror as they realized I was alone. I reached the altar where the pastor waited with barely concealed anxiety. I turned to face the congregation, my voice carrying clearly in the silent space. Thank you all for being here today. As you've probably noticed, there's been a change of plans. Lisa has decided not to go through with the wedding. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. I know many of you have traveled far to be here, and I'm grateful for your presence in what was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life. I saw Lisa's parents in the front row, her mother's face buried in her hands while her father stared straight ahead with a stony expression. Carmen sat between them, her dark eyes fixed on me with an intensity that was almost painful to meet. The reception will go on as planned, I continued. Please, stay and enjoy the food and music. Consider it a celebration of friendship and family, even if it's not the celebration we originally intended. The murmur of voices began immediately as I stepped down from the altar. Some people approached me with sympathy and support. Others whispered among themselves with barely concealed excitement at the drama they'd witnessed. I made my way through the crowd mechanically, accepting condolences and deflecting questions about what had happened. That's when I saw Carmen approaching through the crowd. She changed out of her bridesmaid dress into a simple black sundress, and her long dark hair fell loose around her shoulders instead of the elaborate updo Lisa had insisted on for the wedding party. She moved with purpose through the chattering guests until she stood directly in front of me. David, she said quietly, I am so sorry. What Lisa did today. There's no excuse for it. I looked into her face and saw something I hadn't expected. Genuine anger on my behalf. While everyone else was either pitying me or enjoying the spectacle, Carmen seemed furious at her sister's behavior. It's not your fault, Carmen. You don't need to apologize for her choices. Actually, I do. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking slightly. I knew Tyler was back in town. I saw him at Grind Coffee yesterday morning, and when I asked what he was doing here, he said he'd realized he'd made the biggest mistake of his life leaving Lisa. He was planning to win her back. My stomach dropped. You knew, and you didn't tell me? I didn't think she'd actually. I thought she'd tell him to leave, that she'd moved on. I never imagined she'd abandon you at the altar. Carmen's voice cracked slightly. I should have warned you. I should have told Lisa that what she was thinking was wrong and cruel and… Carmen, I interrupted her gently. You're not responsible for your sister's decisions. She's a grown woman who made a choice. A terrible, hurtful choice, but her choice nonetheless. Carmen looked around at the guests who were beginning to migrate toward the reception area. What are you going to do now? It was a simple question, but it felt enormous. What was I going to do? I'd spent the last 18 months planning a future that had just evaporated. The honeymoon tickets, the apartment lease we'd renewed together, the life we'd been building. All of it suddenly meaningless. I honestly don't know, I admitted. For now, I'm going to go change out of this tux and try to get through the rest of today. Carmen nodded, then hesitated like she wanted to say something else. Instead, she simply touched my arm briefly. If you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask. You didn't deserve this, David. You're a good man, and Lisa threw away something precious today. As she walked away to rejoin her parents, I realized something that should have been obvious much earlier. In 3 years of dating Lisa, Carmen had never said more than a few polite sentences to me at family gatherings. But in this moment of crisis, she'd been the only person to acknowledge not just my pain, but the fundamental wrongness of what had happened. While Lisa's friends were making excuses and her parents were too shocked to function, Carmen had seen the situation clearly and wasn't afraid to call it what it was. A betrayal. Marcus appeared at my elbow. Come on, let's get you out of that monkey suit. Then we're going to get very drunk and figure out how to move forward from this disaster. As we headed toward the preparation room, I caught one last glimpse of Carmen, helping her father support her still sobbing mother. The contrast between the sisters couldn't have been starker. Lisa had chosen drama and impulse, and the thrill of an old flame. Carmen was here dealing with the wreckage, taking care of the people Lisa's decision had hurt. For the first time since Ashley had delivered the news, I felt something other than shock and betrayal. I felt curious about Carmen Rodriguez, the quiet sister who'd been invisible to me for 3 years, but had somehow seen more clearly than anyone else what kind of man I really was. That curiosity would change everything, though I didn't know it yet. At that moment, I was just a man whose bride had called off everything for another man's return. I had no idea that within 2 years, I'd be standing at another altar, watching that same bride panic as I married her sister instead. The Monday morning after what should have been my wedding day felt surreal. I sat in my office at Stevens & Associates, staring at the architectural plans spread across my drafting table, but the lines and measurements might as well have been written in ancient Greek. My phone had been buzzing nonstop since Saturday evening with messages from concerned friends, family members who'd heard the news, and curious acquaintances fishing for details about the wedding disaster. Marcus knocked on my office doorframe carrying 2 cups of coffee from the shop downstairs. "Thought you might need this," he said, setting 1 cup on my desk. "How are you holding up?" I took a grateful sip of the coffee, realizing I hadn't eaten anything substantial since Friday night's rehearsal dinner. Honestly, I feel like I'm walking around in someone else's life, like I'm going to wake up and discover this was all some bizarre stress dream. "Have you heard from her at all?" 3 voicemails and about 15 text messages. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through them. She wants to explain everything, and make me understand why she had to follow her heart. Apparently, seeing Tyler again made her realize that what we had was comfortable, but not passionate. Marcus grimaced. Comfortable. That's got to sting. The part that gets me is that she seems to think I should be grateful for her honesty. Like I should appreciate that she figured out her true feelings before we actually got married, even though she waited until I was literally standing at the altar to share this revelation with me. I'd spent most of Sunday in my apartment, alternating between fury and numbness. The place felt different now, contaminated by all the future plans that would never happen. The Italy travel guides Lisa had left on the coffee table. The wedding, gift thank you cards she'd addressed, but never sent. The second coffee mug by the sink that wouldn't be needed anymore. "What are you going to do about the apartment?" Marcus asked, as if reading my thoughts. "The lease is in both our names, but I can afford it on my own. She'll probably want to come get her stuff at some point." I gestured around the office. "For now, I'm just trying to focus on work. Mr. Stevens has been understanding about me, needing to reschedule the honeymoon time off, but I need to catch up on the Morrison Project proposal." The Morrison Project was a historic renovation downtown, the kind of work that usually excited me. The client wanted to convert a 1920s department store into luxury condos while preserving the original Art Deco facade and restoring the vintage elevator systems. It was exactly the type of challenge that had drawn me to architecture in the first place. But today, the blueprints looked like meaningless scribbles. Around lunchtime, my phone rang with an unknown local number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "David, it's Carmen." Her voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "I hope it's okay that I'm calling. Ashley gave me your work number." "Of course it's okay. Is everything all right? I wanted to check on you, actually, and to let you know that Lisa stopped by our parents' house yesterday. She's staying with Tyler at some hotel downtown while they figure things out, whatever that means." I set down my pencil and leaned back in my chair. "How are your parents handling all this?" "Mom's devastated. She keeps talking about how embarrassed she is, how people are going to gossip about our family. Dad's just angry. He spent a lot of money on that wedding, but more than that, he really liked you. He's taking this whole thing personally. I'm sorry they're caught in the middle of this mess. David, they're not the victims here. You are." Carmen's voice carried an edge I'd never heard before. "Lisa's been calling the house non-stop, wanting to explain herself to everyone. She actually had the nerve to suggest that maybe you and she could still be friends once things settle down. Like you'd want to grab coffee and hear about her grand romance with Tyler. I couldn't help but laugh, though it came out bitter. She suggested the same thing in one of her voicemails. Apparently, she values our deep connection too much to lose me entirely. The level of self-absorption is just... I can't even wrap my head around it. Carmen paused. Look, I know this might sound strange coming from me, but would you like to get lunch sometime this week? I feel like I need to apologize in person for my family's behavior. And honestly, you're probably the only person who understands what it's like to be on the receiving end of Lisa's particular brand of chaos. Right now, I considered the offer. Carmen and I had never spent time alone together. But she'd been the only person at the wedding who'd seemed to grasp the full scope of what Lisa had done. While everyone else had been either pitying me or treating the situation like entertainment, Carmen had been genuinely angry on my behalf. I'd like that, I said. Do you know Grind Coffee on Northwest 23rd? They have decent sandwiches, if you don't mind eating in a place that's permanently full of laptop-wielding hipsters. Perfect. How about Wednesday around noon? After I hung up, I realized it was the first conversation I'd had since Saturday that hadn't left me feeling drained or defensive. Carmen hadn't asked for salacious details about what happened, hadn't offered platitudes about everything working out for the best, and hadn't suggested that maybe this was all a blessing in disguise. She'd simply acknowledged that her sister had behaved terribly and wanted to check on the person who'd been hurt by it. Wednesday arrived gray and drizzly, typical for Portland in late spring. I got to Grind Coffee a few minutes early and claimed a small table near the window, watching the foot traffic on 23rd Avenue. The lunch crowd was the usual mix of freelance graphic designers, graduate students, and people who seemed to make a living crafting artisanal something or others. Carmen arrived exactly on time, shaking raindrops from her dark hair as she scanned the crowded cafe. She'd traded her usual flowing dresses for dark jeans and a fitted green sweater that brought out the gold flecks in her brown eyes. When she spotted me, she smiled with what looked like genuine relief. "Thank you for agreeing to this," she said, as she settled into the chair across from me. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see anyone from my family right now. You're not responsible for what Lisa did. Besides, you were probably the only person at that wedding who understood how messed up the whole situation was." We ordered sandwiches and coffee, then settled into what could have been an awkward silence. Instead, Carmen surprised me by launching into a story about her art therapy classes. "I'm working with kids at Emmanuel Hospital right now, helping them process medical trauma through creative expression. There's this 8-year-old named Miguel who's been in and out of surgery for a heart defect. And yesterday, he painted this incredible picture of himself as a superhero with a bionic heart that shoots rainbow beams. That sounds amazing. How did you get into art therapy?" My college roommate had severe anxiety, and traditional talk therapy wasn't helping her much. But when she started expressing her feelings through sculpture and painting, she finally began to make real progress. I realized that sometimes people need different languages to communicate their deepest experiences. I found myself genuinely interested in her work, asking questions about her techniques and the challenges of working with pediatric patients. Carmen had a way of describing complex emotional concepts that made them accessible without being condescending. She talked about her clients with respect and affection, never sharing details that would violate their privacy, but painting vivid pictures of their resilience and creativity. "What about you?" she asked as we finished our sandwiches. "What drew you to architecture? Lisa always said you were passionate about it, but she was never very specific about why." "I grew up in a small town in Iowa where most of the beautiful, old buildings were either falling apart or being torn down for strip malls and chain restaurants. There was this gorgeous Art Deco movie theater downtown that closed when I was in high school. Instead of restoring it, the city council voted to demolish it for a parking lot." I smiled at the memory. I was so outraged that I wrote a letter to the editor of the local paper arguing for preservation and adaptive reuse. It was probably terrible, but my high school English teacher encouraged me to research architecture programs. "And you ended up specializing in historic renovation?" "Exactly. There's something deeply satisfying about taking a building that people have written off as obsolete and finding ways to honor its original character while making it functional for modern needs. It's like translation, in a way. You're helping old stories speak to new audiences. Carmen's eyes lit up. That's beautiful. I never thought about architecture that way, but it makes perfect sense. You're doing art therapy for buildings instead of people. The comparison made me laugh, but she was right. Both of our careers involved helping damaged things heal while preserving what made them special in the first place. Can I ask you something? Personal? Carmen said, stirring sugar into her second cup of coffee. Shoot. What was it really like dating Lisa? I mean, I know her as my sister, but I've always wondered what she was like as a girlfriend. She never talked about your relationship in much detail. I considered the question carefully. Intense, I said finally. Lisa approaches everything with this complete commitment that can be overwhelming, but also incredibly attractive. When she decides she wants something, she throws herself into it with total focus. The problem is that her attention span for most things is pretty short. Including relationships? I'm starting to think so, yeah. When we first got together, I felt like the most important person in her world. She'd text me constantly, plan elaborate dates, talk about our future together, like it was the most exciting thing imaginable. But over the past year or so, I noticed she seemed restless. She'd start conversations about what our life would be like in other cities, or wonder aloud whether we were settling down too young. Carmen nodded thoughtfully. That sounds like Lisa. She's been that way since we were kids. She'd become completely obsessed with some new hobby or interest, talk about it nonstop for months, then suddenly move on to something else without explanation. The thing is, I don't think she was consciously trying to hurt me. I think she genuinely believed she loved me, right up until the moment she saw Tyler again and realized what she thought was love was actually just my convenience. That doesn't make what she did any less cruel. No, it doesn't. But it helps me understand that this wasn't really about me being inadequate or not enough for her. It was about Lisa not really knowing herself well enough to commit to anyone. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the rain streak down the window. I realized I felt more relaxed than I had in days, maybe weeks. Talking to Carmen was easy in a way that conversations with Lisa had never been. With Lisa, I'd always felt like I was performing slightly, trying to match her energy and enthusiasm. With Carmen, I could just be myself. Can I tell you something that might sound terrible? Carmen asked suddenly. Go ahead. Part of me is relieved that this happened before you actually married her. She looked down at her hands, clearly uncomfortable with the admission. I love my sister, but I've watched her hurt people her whole life by making impulsive decisions and then expecting everyone else to just accept the consequences. You deserved better than spending the next 10 years wondering when she'd get bored and move on to the next shiny thing. Her honesty was startling, but it didn't feel like a betrayal of Lisa. It felt like someone finally acknowledging a truth that everyone else had been too polite to voice. Thank you for saying that, I said. I've been wondering if I'm crazy, for feeling angry instead of just sad. Everyone keeps telling me that at least I found out before we were actually married, like that should make me grateful for the humiliation. You have every right to be angry. She wasted 3 years of your life and humiliated you in front of everyone you care about. The timing doesn't make it better. Over the next 2 weeks, Carmen and I fell into an unexpected friendship. She'd text me articles about architecture or local art events, and I'd send her photos of interesting buildings I encountered during site visits. We met for coffee twice more, conversations flowing easily from work to books, to our shared frustration with Portland's aggressive food truck culture. I found myself looking forward to her messages and feeling disappointed when a day passed without hearing from her. She had this way of seeing details that other people missed, whether it was the story behind a piece of street art or the architectural significance of a building's window placement. Talking to her made me notice things about my own city that I'd been walking past for years. Meanwhile, Lisa continued her campaign to maintain some kind of relationship with me. She'd switched from apologetic voicemails to chatty text messages about mutual friends or shared memories, as if we were old college buddies catching up instead of former fiancé dealing with the aftermath of a spectacular betrayal. I'd stopped, responding entirely, but she seemed to interpret my silence as processing time rather than rejection. Marcus noticed the change in my mood. You seem better, he said one Friday afternoon as we wrapped up work on the Morrison project timeline. Still getting the pathetic texts from Lisa? Every few days. But I've been spending time with Carmen, her sister. She's different. Different how? I struggled to put it into words. Calmer. More thoughtful. She actually listens when you talk instead of just waiting for her turn to speak. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Carmen. Isn't she the one who helped with wedding planning? Yeah, but I never really talked to her before. She was always just Lisa's quiet sister in the background. And now? Now I'm realizing she might be the most interesting person in that family. That weekend, Carmen invited me to an art show at her gallery. It's a group exhibition featuring local artists who work with reclaimed materials, she'd explained over text. I thought you might appreciate the sustainability angle, and honestly, I could use a friendly face there. Gallery openings can be pretentious nightmares. Canvas and clay occupied a converted warehouse space in the industrial district, all exposed, brick walls and polished concrete floors. The artwork was impressive. Sculptures made from salvaged metal, paintings on reclaimed wood, installations incorporating vintage architectural elements. Carmen moved through the space with quiet confidence, pointing out details about the artist's techniques and the stories behind various pieces. This one's my favorite, she said, stopping in front of a large mixed-media piece that incorporated fragments of old window frames, vintage wallpaper, and hand-painted elements. The artist collected materials from houses that were being demolished in North Portland and created this commentary on gentrification and urban development. I studied the piece, seeing layers of meaning in the way new paint interacted with weathered wood and faded floral patterns. It's like archaeology, I said. She's preserving fragments of stories that would otherwise be lost. Exactly. That's why I thought you'd appreciate it. You do something similar with your building renovations. As the evening progressed, I met several of Carmen's colleagues and some of the featured artists. She introduced me simply as my friend, David, without any reference to Lisa or the wedding disaster. I appreciated being seen as myself rather than as the guy who'd been left at the altar. Around 9 o'clock, as the crowd began to thin out, Carmen appeared at my elbow with 2 glasses of wine. So, what's the verdict? Are you completely bored by the hipster art scene? Actually, this has been great. I haven't thought about work, or Lisa, or any of that mess all evening. Good. That was partly the point. We found a quiet corner where we could talk without shouting over the ambient noise of conversations and experimental jazz music. Carmen had changed from her usual casual clothes into a black dress that made her look both professional and elegant. I realized I'd been noticing details about her appearance more frequently lately. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking. The small scar on her wrist from a childhood art project gone wrong. The fact that she never wore the bright lipsticks that Lisa favored. Can I ask you something? I said, feeling emboldened by the wine and the relaxed atmosphere. Sure. Why are you being so nice to me? I mean, I appreciate it more than I can say, but Lisa's your sister. Most people would probably feel like they had to choose sides. Carmen considered the question seriously. Because what she did was wrong, and I don't think family loyalty means pretending otherwise. Besides, she smiled, I genuinely like you. You're kind and thoughtful and funny, and you deserved so much better than what happened. I like you too, I said, and realized as I said it that like wasn't quite the right word anymore. Somewhere in the past few weeks, my feelings for Carmen had shifted from gratitude to genuine affection to something deeper and more complicated. She must have sensed the change in my tone because her expression became more serious. David. I know it's complicated, I said quickly. I know the timing is terrible, and that you're Lisa's sister, and that I'm probably rebounding from a major life trauma. But I need you to know that spending time with you has been the best part of these past few weeks. Carmen looked down at her wine glass, then back up at me. It's been the best part of my weeks, too. We stood there in the noisy gallery, surrounded by art made from broken things transformed into something beautiful, and I felt like I was finally beginning to understand what it meant to be truly seen by someone, not as a safe backup plan or a comfortable choice, but as myself, with all my flaws and complexities intact. What do we do now? I asked. I don't know, Carmen admitted. But I'd like to figure it out together, if you're willing. As I walked her to her car later that evening, I realized that my life was becoming something I'd never planned for, but was genuinely excited about. Lisa had called off everything for Tyler's return, but in leaving, she'd inadvertently led me to something real and unexpected. I still didn't know what would happen when Lisa inevitably found out about my growing feelings for her sister. But for the first time in weeks, I wasn't afraid of the chaos that might follow. Sometimes the most beautiful things grew from the ruins of what you thought you wanted. 3 weeks after the gallery opening, Carmen and I had settled into a rhythm that felt both natural and thrilling. We'd started having dinner together twice a week, alternating between cooking at my apartment and trying new restaurants around the city. What had begun as friendly conversations over coffee had evolved into something deeper, though neither of us had explicitly acknowledged the shift. On a particularly warm June evening, I was preparing dinner in my kitchen when Carmen arrived carrying a bottle of wine and wearing a sundress the color of summer sky. She'd started keeping a spare key to my place after I'd mentioned how much I enjoyed coming home to find her already there, reading on the couch or sketching in her notebook while music played softly in the background. "Smells incredible in here," she said, setting the wine on the counter and peering over my shoulder at the pan where I was searing salmon with a honey glaze. "What's the occasion?" "No occasion, just wanted to make something nice for us." The truth was that every meal with Carmen felt like an occasion worth celebrating. But I didn't want to sound overly sentimental. She moved around my kitchen with the ease of someone who belonged there, setting the table and opening the wine while I finished the fish and plated the roasted vegetables. We'd fallen into these domestic routines without discussion, small intimacies that made my apartment feel more like home than it had even when Lisa lived there. "I have news," Carmen said once we'd settled at the table with our food. "Remember that therapist position I applied for at the children's hospital? They offered me the job today." "Carmen, that's fantastic!" I reached across the table to squeeze her hand, genuinely thrilled for her. "This is exactly what you wanted, right? Full-time art therapy with pediatric patients?" "It's perfect. Better than perfect, actually. They're giving me my own studio space and a budget for supplies, plus the opportunity to develop new programs for different age groups." Her face glowed with excitement. "I'll be working with kids dealing with everything from chronic illness to trauma recovery. It's exactly the kind of work I dreamed about doing when I started graduate school." "When do you start?" 2 weeks, which gives me just enough time to finish up my current projects at the gallery and maybe take a few days to celebrate." She grinned at me over her wine glass. "Want to help me celebrate?" "Absolutely. What did you have in mind?" "There's this little cabin my friend Sarah owns up on Mount Hood. She offered to let me use it for a long weekend if I ever wanted to get away from the city. I was thinking maybe we could drive up there this weekend, do some hiking, cook over an actual fire, just disconnect from everything for a few days." The suggestion sent a flutter of nervousness through my stomach. A weekend away together felt like crossing a line we'd been carefully dancing around for weeks. We'd been growing closer, yes, but we'd never discussed what exactly we were to each other or where our relationship was heading. "That sounds amazing," I heard myself say. "I'll check if I can move my Saturday site visit to next week." Carmen's smile widened. "Really? You want to spend 3 days in the woods with me, away from all civilization?" "I can't think of anything I'd rather do." That Friday afternoon, we loaded my car with hiking gear, groceries, and enough books to stock a small library. The drive up to Mount Hood took us through increasingly dense forest, winding mountain roads that opened occasionally to reveal stunning views of the Cascade Range. Carmen had made a playlist for the trip that mixed indie folk with classic rock, and we sang along badly to songs we both knew while the city fell away behind us. The cabin turned out to be a perfect rustic retreat, all weathered wood and stone with a wraparound porch that looked out over a small lake. Inside, it was cozy without being cramped, with a stone fireplace, a well-equipped kitchen, and a loft bedroom accessible by a steep wooden ladder. "It's beautiful," I said, dropping our bags by the door and walking to the large windows that framed the lake view. "Your friend has excellent taste in hideaways." "Wait until you see the sunrise from the porch," Carmen said, already moving around the space with obvious familiarity. Sarah and I came up here last fall when I was stressed about graduate school applications. There's something about being surrounded by all this natural beauty that puts everything in perspective. We spent the afternoon hiking a trail that circled the lake, stopping frequently to identify wildflowers or sit on fallen logs and talk about everything and nothing. Carmen had brought her sketchbook and would occasionally pause to capture a particularly interesting tree formation or the way light filtered through the forest canopy. I found myself watching her work more than the scenery, fascinated by the intense concentration on her face and the confident movements of her hand across the paper. "You're staring," she said without looking up from her drawing of a massive Douglas fir. "Sorry, I just like watching you create things. There's something mesmerizing about seeing an idea take shape on paper." She glanced up at me with a smile that made my chest tighten. "You do the same thing when you're looking at buildings, you know. You get this expression like you're seeing through the walls to the bones of the structure underneath. Is that a good thing or a weird thing?" "It's a good thing. It's passionate. Too many people go through life without paying attention to the details that make things beautiful." That evening, we cooked dinner together over the cabin's propane stove, then built a fire in the fireplace and settled on the couch with glasses of the wine Carmen had brought. The conversation flowed as easily as it always did, but there was an undercurrent of awareness that hadn't been there before. Every casual touch felt charged with meaning, her hand brushing mine when she reached for her wine glass, the way she curled up against my side when the fire died down and the room grew cooler. "David," she said softly, her head resting on my shoulder, "can I ask you something that might be uncomfortable? Anything. Do you ever think about Lisa when we're together? I mean, do you wonder if you're with me because I remind you of her, or because I'm different from her?" I considered the question carefully. It deserved an honest answer, not a reflexive reassurance. "I think about Lisa sometimes," I said finally. "But not in the way you might expect. When I'm with you, I realize how much energy I spent trying to keep up with her, trying to be the person she needed me to be in any given moment. With you, I can just be myself." Carmen lifted her head to look at me. "What do you mean?" "Lisa always needed me to match her enthusiasm for whatever she was excited about, even when I wasn't naturally drawn to those things. If she wanted to try some new adventure sport or go to a party where I didn't know anyone, I felt like I had to be game for it or I'd disappoint her. With you, I never feel like I'm performing." "And that's what you want? Someone you don't have to perform for?" "I want someone who sees me clearly and likes what they see. Someone who makes me want to be a better person without making me feel like I'm not good enough as I am." I paused, then decided to risk complete honesty. "I want you, Carmen. Not as a rebound from Lisa, not as a consolation prize, but as yourself. You're not like your sister at all, and that's exactly why I'm falling for you." She was quiet for a long moment, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. Then she leaned up and kissed me, soft and tentative at first, then with growing certainty. I kissed her back, tasting wine and possibility, feeling like something that had been tightly wound inside my chest was finally relaxing. When we broke apart, she smiled at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Vulnerable but confident, nervous but sure. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," she admitted. "Just weeks?" I teased. "I've been thinking about it since that first lunch at Grind Coffee." "Really? You hit it well." I was trying to be respectful of the situation. And honestly, I wasn't sure if what I was feeling was real or just gratitude for your kindness. After everything fell apart. Carmen traced patterns on my chest with her finger. "And now? Now I'm sure. What I feel for you is completely separate from anything that happened with Lisa. It's about who you are and how you make me feel when we're together." We stayed up late talking by the dying fire, sharing stories about our childhoods, our dreams, our fears about the future. Carmen told me about growing up in the shadow of her charismatic older sister, always feeling like the quiet, serious one in a family that valued Lisa's dramatic flair. I talked about the pressure I'd felt as an only child to be perfect, to never disappoint my parents who'd sacrificed so much for my education. "I think that's why Lisa's abandonment hit so hard," I said, watching embers glow in the fireplace. "It wasn't just losing the relationship. It was the confirmation that I wasn't enough, that all my efforts to be the perfect boyfriend had failed. Anyway. But that's not what happened, Carmen said firmly. Lisa didn't leave because you weren't enough. She left because she's not capable of appreciating what she has. She's always looking for the next exciting thing, the next drama, the next reason to feel like the center of the universe. Is that how you see your sister? Carmen sighed. I love Lisa, but I've also spent my whole life watching her hurt people without meaning to. She doesn't intend to be cruel, but she's so focused on her own feelings and needs that she doesn't consider how her actions affect others. What she did to you at the wedding was just the most extreme example of a pattern that's been going on for years. That must have been hard, growing up with that dynamic. It was. But it also taught me to value consistency and kindness over excitement and drama. I'd rather have a quiet, steady love than a passionate, unstable one. Is that what you think we could have? Quiet and steady? She looked at me with those deep brown eyes that seemed to see straight through to my soul. I think we could have something real and lasting and beautiful. Not quiet exactly, but peaceful. Like coming home. The next morning, I woke up in the loft bedroom with Carmen curled against my side, early sunlight streaming through the windows. We'd talked until nearly dawn before finally climbing the ladder to the bed, where we'd held each other close, and fallen asleep to the sound of wind in the trees and water lapping at the lake shore. Carmen stirred as I carefully extracted myself from the tangle of sheets, mumbling something about coffee before burying her face in the pillow. I pulled on jeans and a t-shirt and climbed down to start breakfast, smiling at the domestic simplicity of it all. By the time she joined me on the porch 20 minutes later, I had coffee brewing and eggs scrambling on the camp stove I'd set up outside. She appeared in one of my sweatshirts, her hair messy from sleep, looking more beautiful than any person had a right to look before caffeine. Morning, she said, wrapping her arms around me from behind as I tended the eggs. This is a nice way to wake up. Cooking breakfast for you? I could get used to this. I meant waking up with you, but the breakfast is a nice bonus. We ate on the porch, watching mist rise from the lake as the sun climbed higher. The silence between us was comfortable, full of possibility rather than awkwardness. I realized this was what contentment felt like. Not the frantic excitement I'd mistaken for happiness with Lisa, but a deep satisfaction that seemed to reach all the way to my bones. What are you thinking about? Carmen asked, refilling our coffee cups from the French press. How different this feels from anything I've experienced before. How right it feels. Even though we're taking a pretty big risk, dating your ex-fiancé's sister isn't exactly conventional. Especially because of that. The fact that you're willing to deal with the complications that come with being with me says something about how you feel. Carmen reached across the small table and took my hand. I'm not worried about Lisa's reaction or what people will think. I'm worried about you getting hurt again if this doesn't work out. What do you mean? I mean that I'm falling in love with you, David. And I need you to know that before we go any further. This isn't casual for me. If we do this, I'm all in. The words hit me like a physical sensation, warm and electric and terrifying. I'm falling in love with you too, I said, surprised by how easy it was to admit. I think I have been for weeks. She smiled, the kind of radiant expression that transformed her entire face. Really? Really? Carmen, you've made me feel more like myself in the past month than I did in 3 years with Lisa. You see things about me that I didn't even know were there. Like what? Like the fact that I actually have opinions about art and music and food that aren't just reactions to what someone else likes. With Lisa, I was always adapting to her preferences. With you, I'm discovering my own. We spent the rest of the weekend hiking more challenging trails, reading books by the lake, and talking about our plans for the future. Carmen shared her vision for the art therapy program she wanted to develop at the hospital, while I described my hopes of eventually starting my own firm specializing in sustainable historic renovation. I'd love to see some of your work, she said as we packed up the cabin on Sunday morning. Maybe you could show me the Morrison project once it's further along. I'd like that. It's exactly the kind of challenge that made me want to become an architect in the first place. The drive back to Portland felt too short, even though we took the scenic route and stopped frequently to admire viewpoints and small mountain towns. I found myself dreading the return to reality. Not because I was unhappy with my life, but because the weekend had felt like a perfect bubble that I didn't want to burst. "So, what happens now?" I asked, as we pulled into the parking garage of Carmen's apartment building. "Now we figure out how to make this work in the real world," she said. "We tell our friends, we deal with whatever drama Lisa creates when she finds out, and we see if what we have is strong enough to survive outside of romantic cabin weekends." "Are you nervous about that?" "A little. But mostly I'm excited. For the first time in my adult life, I'm with someone who makes me feel completely myself." As I helped her carry her bags upstairs, I realized that the past 3 days had fundamentally changed something inside me. I'd gone from a man recovering from betrayal to someone actively building a new kind of happiness. Carmen had shown me what it felt like to be genuinely appreciated, not for what I could provide or how well I could adapt to someone else's needs, but for who I actually was. "Thank you," I said as we stood outside her apartment door. "For what?" "For seeing me, for taking a chance on something complicated, for making me believe in love again." She kissed me softly, then smiled against my lips. "Thank you for being worth the risk." As I drove home to my own apartment, I felt lighter than I had in months. Lisa had called off everything for Tyler's return, but in doing so, she'd inadvertently given me the greatest gift of my life. She'd led me to Carmen, and Carmen had led me back to myself. I had no idea that within days, our perfect bubble would be tested in ways I couldn't have imagined. But in that moment, driving through the Portland streets with the taste of Carmen's kiss still on my lips, I felt invincible. We had something real and precious, and I was finally ready to fight for it. The Monday morning after our return from Mount Hood, I was reviewing blueprints in my office when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. My stomach dropped when I opened it and saw Lisa's message. "We need to talk. Meet me at the Mason jar tonight at 7. It's important." I stared at the screen for a long moment, debating whether to respond at all. For the past 6 weeks, I'd successfully avoided any direct contact with her, ignoring her calls and messages while focusing on rebuilding my life. But something about the tone of this message felt different, less apologetic, more demanding. Marcus knocked on my office door, carrying a stack of permit applications. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Everything okay?" "Lisa wants to meet tonight. First contact since the wedding disaster. Are you going to go?" I set my phone aside and turned back to the blueprints. "I don't know. Part of me thinks I should just ignore her completely, but another part is curious about what she could possibly have to say after all this time. Maybe she's finally ready to apologize properly? Or maybe Tyler dumped her and she wants you back." The thought of Lisa trying to reconcile made my chest tighten with anxiety. 6 weeks ago, I might have been tempted to listen to whatever explanation she offered. But now, after experiencing what real compatibility felt like with Carmen, the idea of going backward seemed impossible. "I think I need to go," I said finally. "Not because I want to reconcile, but because I need to close that chapter completely. If she has something to say, I'd rather hear it and be done with it than spend months wondering what she wanted." Marcus nodded. "Want backup? I could lurk at the bar and intervene if things get ugly." "Thanks, but I think this is something I need to handle alone." The Mason Jar was a trendy bistro in the Pearl District that Lisa had always loved for its exposed brick walls and artisanal cocktail menu. I arrived a few minutes early and claimed a table in the back corner, wanting to control the environment as much as possible. When Lisa walked in at exactly 7 o'clock, I barely recognized her. She'd lost weight, enough that her designer jeans hung loose around her hips. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wasn't wearing the bold makeup that had always been her signature. Most striking was her expression. Instead of the confident smile she'd worn throughout our relationship, she looked nervous, almost fragile. "Thank you for coming," she said, as she slid into the chair across from me. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't. What do you want, Lisa?" She flinched slightly at my direct tone. "I want to explain what happened. I want you to understand why I had to make the choice I made." "I understand perfectly. Tyler came back. You realized you still had feelings for him. And you decided to abandon me at the altar rather than have an honest conversation beforehand. What's to explain? It's not that simple. Lisa's voice cracked slightly. David, I never meant to hurt you. When Tyler showed up that morning, seeing him again made me realize that I'd been lying to myself about my feelings. I thought I was over him, but the moment I saw his face, everything came flooding back. So you ran off with him without a second thought for the 300 people waiting for us to get married. I panicked. I knew that if I went through with the wedding when I was having those doubts, it wouldn't be fair to either of us. I thought I was being honest by stopping it before we made a mistake. I studied her face, looking for signs of the woman I'd once planned to marry. How's that working out for you? Are you and Tyler living happily ever after? Lisa's composure cracked completely. Tears started streaming down her cheeks as she shook her head. He left again. 2 weeks ago. Said he realized he'd romanticized our relationship and that we'd both changed too much to go back to what we had. There it was. Tyler had abandoned her just like he had years before, and now she was here looking for sympathy or possibly reconciliation. I felt a mixture of vindication and genuine sadness for her pain, but no desire to comfort her. I'm sorry he hurt you, I said, and meant it. But that doesn't change what you did to me. I know I messed up everything, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But David, we were good together. We had 3 amazing years, and I think we could have that again if you'd just give me another chance. Lisa, there is no chance. What we had is over. Because of Tyler? Because I made one mistake when I was confused and scared? Because you showed me exactly how little our relationship meant to you? Because you humiliated me in front of everyone? We know rather than have an adult conversation about your doubts. Because I've realized we were never as compatible as I thought we were. Lisa leaned forward desperately. That's not true. We were perfect together. Everyone said so. We had the same friends, the same interests. No, Lisa. You had interests, and I adapted to them. There's a difference. What does that mean? It means I spent 3 years trying to be the person you needed instead of being myself. It means I'm not interested in going back to that dynamic. She stared at me with growing panic. You're different. You never used to talk to me like this. Maybe that was part of the problem. Lisa was quiet for a moment, clearly struggling to process my responses. This wasn't going the way she'd expected. Is there someone else? The question hung in the air between us. I could have lied, deflected, or simply refused to answer. Instead, I decided on honesty. Yes. The single word hit her like a physical blow. Her face went white, then flushed red with anger. Already? It's only been 6 weeks since our wedding. Since you called off our wedding, I corrected. And yes, I've met someone who makes me happy. Who is it? Do I know her? I hesitated, knowing that my answer would create a storm of drama that would inevitably reach Carmen. But hiding the truth would only delay the inevitable confrontation. It's Carmen. Lisa stared at me in complete shock, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Finally, she found her voice. Carmen? My sister Carmen? Yes. You're dating my sister? Her voice rose loud enough that other diners turned to look at us. I'm in love with your sister, I said calmly. And she's in love with me. Lisa's face contorted with rage and disbelief. You bastard. You're doing this to hurt me, to get revenge for what happened at the wedding. This has nothing to do with you, Lisa. Carmen and I connected after you left, and we discovered we have genuine feelings for each other. She's my sister. How could she do this to me? How could she do what? Fall in love with someone you abandoned? You don't get to claim ownership over my life just because you decided you didn't want it. Lisa stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This isn't over, David. Carmen is my family, and I'm not going to let you use her to get back at me. Sit down, Lisa. People are staring. I don't care who's staring, she practically shouted. You want to hurt me? Fine, but leave Carmen out of it. She doesn't deserve to get caught up in your vindictive games. The only person playing games here is you. Carmen and I are building something real together. Something honest. If you can't accept that, it's your problem, not ours. Lisa grabbed her purse and leaned down to hiss in my ear. Stay away from my sister. She's too good for someone as petty and manipulative as you've become. With that, she stormed out of the restaurant, leaving me sitting alone at the table, while the other patrons whispered and stared. I signaled the waitress for the check, knowing that Lisa would immediately call Carmen to demand an explanation. My phone rang before I'd even made it to my car. Carmen's name appeared on the screen, and I answered with a sinking feeling in my stomach. David? Her voice was tight with stress. Lisa just called me screaming about you and me being together. She's on her way to my apartment right now, and she sounded completely unhinged. I'm sorry. She cornered me into meeting her tonight, and when she asked if there was someone else, I told her the truth. It's okay. I'm glad you were honest, but she's furious, and I think this is going to get ugly. Do you want me to come over? Actually, yes. I think it might be better if we face this together. I drove to Carmen's apartment in the Hawthorne district, my mind racing through possible scenarios for the confrontation ahead. Lisa could be dramatic under the best circumstances, and finding out about Carmen and me had clearly pushed her over the edge. Carmen met me at the building entrance, her face pale but determined. She's been calling and texting nonstop for the past 20 minutes. I finally turned off my phone, but she'll probably just show up anyway. Are you having second thoughts? About this? About us? I asked, taking her hands in mine. No. Are you? Not for a second. But I want you to know that I understand if dealing with Lisa's drama becomes too much. I won't blame you if you decide this is more complicated than you bargained for. Carmen squeezed my hands. David, I knew exactly what I was getting into when I told you I loved you. Lisa's reaction doesn't change how I feel about you. We'd barely made it upstairs to her apartment when the buzzer started ringing insistently. Carmen looked at the intercom video screen and sighed. It's her, and she looks like she's been crying. Do you want to let her up? We might as well get this over with. Carmen buzzed Lisa into the building, and within minutes we could hear her footsteps pounding up the stairs. She knocked on the door with enough force to rattle the frame, then started shouting before Carmen could even open it. Carmen, open this door right now. We need to talk. Carmen took a deep breath and opened the door. Lisa burst into the apartment like a hurricane, her eyes red from crying and her hair disheveled. When she saw me standing in the living room, her expression shifted from hurt to pure fury. I cannot believe you would do this to me, she said, advancing on Carmen while pointing an accusatory finger at me. My own sister, sleeping with my ex-fiancé 6 weeks after he was supposed to marry me. Lisa, calm down, Carmen said firmly. You're upset, but that doesn't give you the right to come into my home and start making accusations. Accusations? You're betraying your own family for this vindictive piece of garbage! Watch your mouth, I said, stepping closer to Carmen. You don't get to insult either of us just because you're angry. Lisa whirled on me. You planned this, didn't you? You figured out the perfect way to hurt me by seducing my innocent little sister. That's enough, Carmen snapped. David didn't seduce me, and I'm not innocent. I'm a grown woman who makes her own choices, and I choose to be with him. Why? Because you want to hurt me too? Because you're jealous that I was always the pretty one, the popular one, the one who got the guy? The cruelty of the comment hung in the air like poison. I watched Carmen's face flush with pain and anger, and something protective and fierce rose up in my chest. Actually, I said, my voice deadly calm, Carmen is everything you're not. She's kind, thoughtful, genuine, and beautiful inside and out. She doesn't need drama and chaos to feel important, and she's never once made me feel like I wasn't enough exactly as I am. Lisa's face crumpled. You really love her. Yes, I do. More than I ever loved you, if I'm being completely honest. The words were harsh, but they were true, and they needed to be said. Lisa stared at both of us for a long moment, tears streaming down her cheeks. Carmen, she said finally, her voice breaking. Please, don't do this. He's going to hurt you, just like he hurt me. He didn't hurt you, Lisa, Carmen replied quietly. You hurt him, and you hurt yourself. David is a good man who deserves to be loved by someone who appreciates him. And you think that's you? I know it is. Lisa looked between us one more time, then seemed to deflate completely. Fine. Be together. But don't expect me to be happy about it, and don't expect our family to welcome him with open arms. She headed for the door, then turned back one last time. When this falls apart, Carmen, don't come crying to me. I won't be there to pick up the pieces. After she left, Carmen and I stood in the sudden silence of her apartment, both emotionally drained from the confrontation. I pulled her into my arms, feeling her trembling slightly against my chest. That went about as well as expected, she said with a shaky laugh. Are you okay? I will be. Lisa's always been cruel when she doesn't get her way, but this was worse than usual. I'm sorry you had to hear those things about yourself. None of them were true. Carmen pulled back to look at me. I know, and I meant what I said. My feelings for you aren't going to change because Lisa throws a tantrum. Even if it means damaging your relationship with your family. My parents will come around once they see how happy we are together. As for Lisa, Carmen shrugged. She made her choice when she abandoned you at the altar. She doesn't get to dictate what happens next. I kissed her forehead, overwhelmed with admiration for her strength and clarity. I love you. I love you too, and I'm not going anywhere no matter how much drama Lisa creates. But even as we held each other in the aftermath of the confrontation, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Lisa had always been relentless when she wanted something, and now that she'd lost both Tyler and me, she seemed determined to destroy what Carmen and I had built together. The test of our relationship was just beginning. Final reckoning and new beginning. 2 years later, I stood in the same chapel where Lisa had abandoned me, but everything was different. The afternoon sun streamed through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the wooden pews filled with friends and family. Carmen's hand was warm in mine as we exchanged vows, her voice steady and sure as she promised to love me through whatever challenges lay ahead. You may kiss the bride, the pastor announced, and as our lips met, I heard the applause of people who genuinely wanted us to be happy. Marcus stood beside me as best man, grinning like he'd personally orchestrated our entire romance. Carmen's parents sat in the front row, beaming with pride for their younger daughter who'd found real love. The one conspicuous absence was Lisa. She hadn't spoken to either of us since that night at Carmen's apartment, despite Carmen's attempts to repair their relationship. According to their mother, Lisa had moved to Seattle 6 months ago, claiming she needed a fresh start away from Portland's painful memories. Our reception was everything the first weddings would have been, but better because it was genuinely ours. We danced to a song Carmen had chosen because it reminded her of our weekend at Mount Hood. I gave a speech thanking everyone for supporting us through the unconventional beginning of our relationship. Carmen's father toasted to second chances, and the wisdom to recognize true love when it finally arrives. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Carmen and I stepped outside onto the garden terrace for a moment of quiet together. She looked radiant in her simple ivory dress, her dark hair adorned with the wildflowers she'd insisted on instead of traditional roses. Any regrets? I asked, pulling her close. Only that we waited so long to have this conversation, she said, referring to the 2 years of dating that had led to this moment. I knew I wanted to marry you after that first weekend away together. What took you so long to tell me? I was waiting for you to be completely sure. I needed to know you were choosing me for me. Not just because I was different from Lisa. I kissed her temple, breathing in the scent of her perfume mixed with the garden flowers. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. A movement near the chapel entrance caught my eye, and my heart stopped. Lisa stood in the shadows by the doorway, wearing a black dress and looking like she'd lost even more weight. Her face was gaunt, her eyes hollow with something that went deeper than mere sadness. Carmen, I said quietly, nodding toward the building. Carmen turned and saw her sister, her expression immediately shifting to concern. Lisa, what are you doing here? Lisa stepped into the light, and I could see she'd been crying. Her makeup was smudged, and her hands were shaking slightly. I had to come. I had to see it for myself. See what? Carmen asked gently, moving toward her sister with the careful movements of someone approaching a wounded animal. See you marry the man who should have been mine." Lisa's voice was raw with pain, and something that sounded dangerously close to desperation. "See you living the life I threw away. Lisa, you made your choice. You chose Tyler over David, remember? Tyler was a mistake. I knew it within days, but by then it was too late. David had already moved on to you." I stayed back, letting Carmen handle her sister, but I kept my eyes on Lisa's face. There was something unhinged about her expression that made me nervous. "It's been 2 years," Carmen said softly. "You've had time to build a new life in Seattle, meet someone new." "There is no one new?" Lisa's voice cracked with hysteria. "There will never be anyone like David. He was perfect, and I destroyed it all for a fantasy that lasted 2 weeks. Lisa, you need help. This obsession isn't healthy." "Obsession?" Lisa laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. "I'm not obsessed. I'm just finally seeing clearly. David, please, just talk to me for 5 minutes. Let me explain what really happened." I stepped forward, placing a protective hand on Carmen's shoulder. "There's nothing to explain, Lisa. You made your choice, and I made mine. We're married now. It's over. It doesn't have to be over. Carmen will understand. Won't you, Carmen? She knows I saw him first. She knows I loved him first." Carmen's face flushed with anger. "What I know is that you had your chance and you threw it away. David deserves someone who appreciates him. Someone who won't abandon him the moment something more exciting comes along. Like you? Plain little Carmen who was always jealous of everything I had? I was never jealous of you, Lisa. I felt sorry for you. You had everything handed to you and you never learned to value any of it." Lisa's composure completely shattered. She lunged forward, grabbing my arm with surprising strength. "David, please. I know you still love me. I can see it in your eyes. Don't let my sister manipulate you into this marriage." I gently but firmly removed her hand from my arm. "Lisa, I don't love you anymore. I haven't for a long time. What Carmen and I have is real and honest and built on mutual respect. It's everything we never had." The words hit Lisa like physical blows. She staggered backward, her face contorting with pain and rage. "This isn't over," she whispered. "I won't let her steal my life." "Carmen didn't steal anything," I said, firmly. "You gave it away." Lisa stared at both of us for a long moment, then turned and disappeared into the darkness beyond the garden lights. Carmen and I stood in stunned silence, the joy of our wedding day dimmed by the encounter. "Should we call someone?" Carmen asked. She seemed really unstable. "I'll call her parents tomorrow, let them know what happened. Maybe they can get her some help." Carmen nodded, then looked up at me with worried eyes. "Do you think she meant what she said about this not being over?" "I think Lisa is hurting and desperate. But there's nothing she can do to change what we have. We're married, Carmen. We chose each other. And no amount of drama from your sister can undo that." Carmen smiled, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "You're right. Besides, I'm not the same pushover little sister I used to be. If Lisa wants to fight for you, she'll discover I'm more than capable of fighting back." I kissed my new wife under the stars, tasting champagne and promise on her lips. Whatever challenges Lisa might try to create, Carmen and I would face them together. We'd already survived the test of her interference once before, and we'd emerged stronger for it. As we walked back toward the reception to say goodbye to our remaining guests, I realized that Lisa's unexpected appearance had actually been a gift. It had shown me just how completely my feelings had changed, how utterly committed I was to the woman beside me. 2 years ago, seeing Lisa in distress might have awakened some protective instinct or residual affection. Tonight, I felt only pity for what she'd become and gratitude for what I'd found with Carmen. Lisa had called off everything for Tyler's return, then panicked when I married her sister. But her panic changed nothing. Carmen and I had built something beautiful from the ashes of Lisa's betrayal, and no amount of regret or desperation could take that away from us. The irony wasn't lost on me that Lisa's worst decision had led to my greatest happiness. In abandoning me at the altar, she'd freed me to find the love I was truly meant to have. Up next, You've got 2 more standout stories. Right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.